People laughed loudly inside the glass-enclosed dining room of the city's most expensive cafe, while the young woman with the worn coat and tired eyes cowered before the manager. "We don't hire people like you here," the sharp voice echoed, and eyes turned to her like sharp blades. Her small daughter, with cold hands and a torn backpack, waited outside, unaware that her mother had just been crushed by the weight of public humiliation. Some customers discreetly filmed the scene, enjoying the embarrassment as if the suffering were a gratuitous spectacle. Her silence seemed to scream louder than any words. A tear fell, not for the lost job, but for the contempt written all over the faces around her. And when she turned away, the whispers sounded like knives. Poor thing, she should know her place. No one imagined that, at that very moment, someone was watching from afar, with a fixed and silent gaze, ready to shatter every certainty exposed there. That's when the silence was, broken by firm footsteps echoing on the marble floor. A man in an impeccable suit and an almost cinematic presence crossed the room, drawing immediate attention. Some whispered his name, as if he were a living legend, the millionaire who controlled half the city's businesses. The manager tried to compose herself, but surprise froze her fake smile. Without looking at anyone, he stopped in front of the humiliated young woman, stared into her teary eyes, and said in a low voice, but audible enough, "For everyone. If she asked for a job, it's not to serve coffee, it's to work directly with me. She's hired." The silence that had previously been piercing now became an unbearable weight on everyone who had laughed. The daughter outside didn't understand immediately, but she saw her mother lifted like never before, and in a single gesture, that millionaire destroyed the cruel logic of the scene. No one laughed anymore. Everyone knew that something much bigger was just beginning. If this scene has already made you feel the shame, injustice, and unexpected twists that life can bring, don't miss it. Subscribe to the channel now to follow each new story that touches your heart and exposes the power of destiny. Leave a like to further strengthen this space where we reveal that no one stays on the ground forever. And write in the comments, do you believe that justice comes at the right time, even when everyone seems against you? Your answer may inspire others who are also living their own silent battles. That morning, the city seemed to move at a pace that brooked no hesitation. The sky still carried grayish hues after the early morning rain, reflecting off the tall windows of the buildings and the asphalt, which gleamed under the weight of the first hurried steps. The streets were filled with people who didn't look to either side, just kept moving forward, as if every second were too costly to waste. In the heart of that bustling center, the neighborhood's most luxurious cafe stood out like a temple of appearances, where businessmen discussed deals at marble tables, and wealthy young people displayed their designer clothes as if they were invisible trophies. The atmosphere carried an air of exclusivity, a bubble where only those who belonged were allowed to remain. The sound of clinking cups, rehearsed laughter, and conversations in hurried English composed the soundtrack of that place that prided itself on being unreachable for most. It was into this setting that she entered. The young woman's face bore the marks of sleepless nights, a weariness hidden beneath a feeble attempt at confidence. She wore a worn, clean coat that betrayed her daily struggle with lack of energy. Her shoes were wet from the rain, and the hem of her pants bore splashes that couldn't be avoided after walking miles to get there. Even so, she took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and held in her hand an old but carefully organized folder where she stored documents, old letters of recommendation, and a resume that, though simple, told a story of struggle and persistence. In her eyes was an almost invisible flame, a mixture of hope and despair, as if she knew that this moment could mean the difference between moving forward or falling apart. Outside, her young daughter waited on a bench, hugging her worn school backpack, playing with the loose laces while glancing from time to time at the cafe door, hoping her mother would return with good news. Inside the salon, the atmosphere changed the moment she approached the counter. Some eyes turned, not with interest, but with that silent judgment that weighs more heavily than any spoken word. The manager, with a practiced smile and the posture of someone who believed herself to be the guardian of the place's elegance, received her coldly. As the customers continued their conversations, some noticed what was happening and remained attentive, waiting to see what would unfold before them. It was as if everyone was almost instinctively seeking a distraction, and she, unwittingly, had become the spectacle of the day. Still, with a trembling but firm voice, she asked for the chance to interview. Her tone was polite, almost pleading, but it carried dignity, a kind of discreet strength that even the cruelest looks couldn't completely erase. Tension mounted when the manager, instead of simply assessing the order, lifted her chin and hurled a question laden with contempt. "Do you really believe this is the place for you?" Silence fell like a veil over the room. Conversation subsided, and the sound of spoons clanging against cups ceased. The young woman took a deep breath, trying to remain calm, and replied simply that she just needed an opportunity. This small phrase sounded like a challenge to some and weakness to others, and it was at this point that the atmosphere of the cafe transformed into the stage for a scene no one would forget. The humiliation was not only in the words, but in the suppressed laughter, the cell phones that began to rise discreetly, recording without her noticing, and the false superiority of those who believed they owned a world she could never be a part of. The atmosphere had been prepared for something yet to come, a turning point that would forever change the logic of that place and the lives of all who witnessed it. She always thought poverty smelled like a mixture of old mold, cheap soap, and overbrewed coffee on mornings when the house shook. With the school bus outside. She grew up in roadside motels and rooms rented by the week, where the windows barely closed and the Ohio winter crept in unbidden. Her father disappeared before her first birthday. Her mother, when she found a job, would return late with cut fingers and a weary laugh, trying to turn coins into dinner. It was there that the girl learned to mend, to hide her growling stomach, and to speak softly so as not to disturb. At 15, her mother fell ill, and the hospital devoured what little she had. At 17, she was left alone with a crumpled high school diploma and a courage that made no noise. She left for the big city like someone fleeing from fire, carrying 2 old suitcases, a faded photo, and a notebook where she wrote promises to herself, not to repeat history, not to let hunger become her surname. Then came the pregnancy, unexpected as rain in the desert, and with it a silence on the other end of the line. The child's father cut off contact the day. He heard the word responsibility. That's how she learned to be a mother while learning to survive, working late nights cleaning for apps, handing out flyers at intersections, and counting change with frozen fingers. Her daughter was born in a public hospital with a piercing cry that reshaped her life. They named her Ava, simple as a breath, strong as what remains when everything falls. At night, when Ava slept, she studied free videos, learned formal English, typed quickly, and memorized terms. She heard in interviews she was never invited to. On birthdays, the celebration consisted of bakery cake cut into millimeter slices and a lost balloon that always escaped to the ceiling. On summer afternoons, the square was both a park and a living room. Fear appeared in the form of eviction notices and red letters pinned to doors, but also in teachers who suggested Ava might benefit from another class, as if poverty were a language that hindered literacy. With each closed door, she noted the date and promised another try. She collected no's like someone collecting thorns, and yet with wounded hands she held fast to her dignity. There were days when she ate dinner as an excuse to get her daughter to eat, and entire nights when she monitored fevers, praying the ambulance wouldn't be necessary, because ambulances cost money and have names in small print. Still, she cultivated small gardens, a bookshelf of books found in donations, a broken cup turned into a basil pot, the stories she told Ava about women crossing invisible bridges. There was no grand heroism, just small choices stubbornly repeated: get up, wash, go, try, fail, come back, try again. When the rain came through the roof, she would place basins and call them lakes, and Ava would laugh, believing this invented country was the first step on a larger map. It was on this map that, one morning, she drew the route to the cafe everyone called untouchable. And it was with this past, where every penny weighed like lead, and every gesture a hidden prayer, that she pushed open the glass door, unaware that the old story of abandonment, pain, and silence, was about to encounter a mirror that would restore another face to what had always been invisible. That morning, the cafe was busier than usual. A group of young executives sat at the central table, laughing loudly as if each guffaw were a display of power. Among them, the manager strove to appear elite, serving them with exaggerated deference. They talked about numbers, contracts, and international travel, but the tone wasn't businesslike. It was ostentatious. It was onto this stage of vanity that the young mother approached, with measured steps and a polite voice, asking only for the chance to interview. What she didn't know was that moments before her arrival, the executives had launched a cruel game, one of those that seem like harmless jokes between people who believe they'll never be questioned. One of them had bet that the manager wouldn't have the courage to deny someone in the middle of the room in front of everyone, just to prove that this space wasn't for just anyone. Another responded that not only would she have the courage, but that she would do so in such a clear and humiliating way that it would become the talk of the day. They laughed between sips of imported coffee, and the bet was sealed, $100 to whoever ran the show with the greatest cruelty. When the young woman walked through the door, everyone felt the shock of fate conspiring in favor of foul play. Her wet shoes, stained pants, and tired face were the perfect setting for the scene they were about to enact. The manager cast a quick glance at the group and then at the newcomer. It was enough to seal her decision. She would be used as a puppet in a bet she knew nothing about. The request for an interview met not even a human eye. It found only the gears of a previously planned humiliation. Some customers, oblivious to the bet, noticed the awkward atmosphere and looked at each other in confusion. Others, more attentive, smelled the cruelty in the air and decided to watch the scene unfold like someone observing an inevitable accident. As the young woman carefully explained that she had experience in service, that she had learned quickly, and that she just needed a chance to support her daughter, giggles echoed discreetly from the executive table. The manager, with a cold smile, interrupted her speech and asked aloud if she really believed that a place like that needed someone with so little to offer. The comment was like a shot in the air. Everyone heard, everyone reacted. The room was suspended in an awkward silence, followed by stares that stripped her of all dignity. Her daughter, outside, watched through the glass, not understanding the weight of her words, but sensing that something was wrong. The bet, invisible to most, dictated every move. The manager insisted on exaggerating her posture, like an actress before an audience. The more discomfort she caused the young woman, the more the executives enjoyed themselves, certain that the cash prize was not only material but symbolic, confirmation that they could shape realities with simple gestures of contempt. What they didn't imagine was that this cruel game was being observed by someone who didn't laugh, didn't participate, and didn't forget. A distant gaze, sitting in a discreet corner of the cafe, watched everything silently. The man in the impeccable suit, who seemed like just another customer busy with paperwork and a phone, had noticed from the first moment what was happening. For him, there was no bet, no spectacle. There was simply an injustice unfolding before his eyes, about to collide with his own history in a way no one there could have foreseen. The silence that followed the executive's muffled laughter seemed to weigh down every glass wall of the cafe. The young woman, still clutching her briefcase to her chest, wasn't sure whether to continue explaining or simply thank them and leave. The manager, satisfied with her performance, was preparing to end the scene when a chair was slowly dragged from the most discreet corner of the room. The metallic sound echoed almost theatrically, forcing everyone to turn their heads. There he was, the man with an imposing presence, a neat suit, a fixed gaze, and an impenetrable expression. He needed no introduction. The mere silence surrounding him said it all. He was the kind of figure who didn't blend in with the surroundings, but dominated them simply by existing within them. The young woman, noticing that gaze upon her, felt a shiver run down her spine. It wasn't fear, nor was it comfort. It was as if she had suddenly been plucked from her invisible target position and placed under the direct light of a spotlight. Her heart raced, but she didn't look away. There was a trace of dignity there that not even humiliation could erase. The millionaire stood slowly, straightened his jacket as if preparing to speak in court, and crossed the room with measured steps. Each step seemed to prolong the tension, as if everyone present was holding their breath. He stopped in front of her, not sparing a single glance at the manager or the executives. His gaze was fixed on the young woman's tired eyes, as if searching not only for who she was, but for everything that lay behind her. The voice, when it came, wasn't loud, but it resonated like a contained thunder. "What's your name?" It took her a second to answer, surprised that someone there had finally bothered to ask. She said in a whisper, "Emily." The name hung in the air, simple, unassuming, but loaded with the weight of her story. The executives laughed, thinking the gesture was just another act to make the situation even more awkward. The manager tried to intervene, saying she was taking care of it, but he raised his hand without even looking at her, and the gesture was enough to silence her. There was a quiet authority in his posture that needed no words. Emily, confused, didn't know whether to thank him, apologize, or simply walk away. But before any words could escape, he continued, "And what are you looking for, Emily?" The way he said her name shattered something in the atmosphere. There was no contempt, no irony. There was just a genuine question, charged with genuine interest. She took a deep breath, the folder still pressed against her chest, and replied that she simply wanted a job. Opportunity to support her daughter. The entire room seemed to shrink in that instant. Her words, spoken simply, carried more power than any flowery speech. He nodded slightly, as if he already knew the answer before he even heard it. Then he leaned forward slightly and said something that made everyone hold their breath. "Then you'll be working with me." There was no explanation, no context, just a statement that sounded like a decree. The manager's face paled, the executives looked at each other in shock, and Emily remained motionless, trying to understand if this was real or just another cruel twist of fate. But when he spoke again, in a low, firm tone, the doubt dissipated. "No one here will laugh at you again." It was the first time in a long time that Emily felt the weight of humiliation transform into something else. Silent respect. The scene, which had begun to tilt in her favor, quickly turned into a cruel arena when the executives realized they were losing control of the show. The millionaire had broken the logic of the game, and for them this was unforgivable. One of them, the youngest and most arrogant, slammed his hand on the table and said loudly, mockingly, "This has got to be a joke. This place is for business, not for handouts." The laughter that followed sounded forced but gained strength, as if each laugh were a shield against the discomfort of seeing a powerful man defend someone invisible. The manager, trying to recover from the humiliation of being interrupted, found the strength to join in. "Sir, with all due respect, but this girl doesn't fit the bill. She has no training, no looks. She barely seems capable of waiting a table without tripping. It's a waste of time." The impact was immediate. The entire room heard it, and cell phones, previously discreet, began filming shamelessly. Emily felt her face burn, not from the rain still drying on her clothes, but from the weight of the exposure. There was no hiding. She was there, in front of everyone, reduced to a cruel portrait painted by people who saw her as less than. Her daughter outside clutched her backpack to her chest, sensing something was wrong, even without clearly hearing the words. Emily tried to speak, but her voice faltered. The manager took advantage of this and, as if delivering the final blow, uttered the phrase that spread through the salon like poison. "We don't hire people like you here. People like that only tarnish our brand image." It was at that moment that the humiliation turned into a full-blown spectacle. Some customers looked away, embarrassed to witness the cruelty. Others, however, laughed, took photos, and exchanged sarcastic comments as if watching a live entertainment program. The millionaire remained silent, watching. The way he didn't react immediately was disconcerting. Emily, for a second, thought she might have been mistaken, that that brief spark of hope was just an illusion. But when she looked at him again, she noticed something different. There wasn't contempt in his eyes, but rather cold calculation, as if he were waiting for each cruel word to be spoken, only to return it double at the right moment. The humiliation reached its peak when one of the executives raised his glass of iced coffee and in an almost symbolic gesture toasted the others, saying, "To the people who don't know their place." Laughter echoed. Emily closed her eyes, held back tears, and for a second wished she could disappear. But it was precisely at this point of greatest shame that something silent began to shift. The public cruelty, filmed, recorded, and spread by the gays, wasn't just an attack on her. It was a rope being pulled ever tighter, about to snap violently against those who believed they were in control. At that moment, without anyone noticing, karma had already taken a seat at the table. And the contempt they laughed at now would be the weapon that, sooner than they imagined, would make them choke on the justice that approached like an inevitable shadow. The room was still ringing with the last laugh when Emily, instead of recoiling as everyone expected, took a deep breath and lifted her chin. The gesture surprised even the millionaire, who had watched her silently. The executives, confident they had sealed her defeat, failed to notice that her breathing now wasn't that of a beggar, but of someone preparing to give back. Emily's heart pounded, but not with shame, but with the courage accumulated over years of swallowed silence. Her hands, previously trembling, relaxed on the folder she held, and her eyes, tearful, now burned with something no one there had anticipated: knowledge. She glared at the manager, who was still smiling contemptuously, and spoke in a voice firm enough to echo throughout the cafe. "It's funny you say contracts don't have a place here, because I know every clause in the contracts you sign with suppliers. I even know the fines you hide, the deadlines you miss, the lies you tell clients who will never find out. You think I don't understand anything, but I spent nights reading these documents while cleaning offices like this. You underestimated me." The impact was immediate. The manager froze, trying to maintain a smile, but the color was already draining from her face. Emily then turned to the executives, who glanced at each other, laughing less. "You made this a bet, didn't you? You think I didn't notice? I heard it before I walked in. You bet my dignity like a playing card, $100 in exchange for my shame. But the difference between us is that I have nothing to lose. You do." The words cut through the air like invisible blades. Some customers coughed nervously, others discreetly put down their cups, trying to hide their discomfort. The cell phones continued filming, but now they captured not a humiliated woman, but someone returning the attack with fierce dignity. Emily opened the folder she carried against her chest and revealed a few yellowed pages, printouts of reports, job postings, and notes from selection processes. "You think I just came here to try for some random job? I came prepared. I know who owns this coffee chain. I know where they invest. I even know the stock price of the holding company that controls them. I read every published interview, studied every word. While you laughed at me, I prepared myself. And today, in front of everyone, you show exactly who you are. Cruel, petty, mean. I wasn't the one who lowered myself here." Silence fell heavily. The millionaire, who had been watching until then, let out the barest of smiles, almost imperceptible, as if confirming something he already knew. Emily, however, didn't look at him. She continued to stare at those who had hurt her. "The difference between you and me is simple. You need others to believe you're great. I don't. I know who I am and what I can become. Laugh, film, post. But know that soon, when this video goes viral on social media, it won't be the poor rejected woman everyone will be talking about. It will be you. Your bet is that it will haunt your names." At that moment, the executives realized the game was over. The game that had begun as gratuitous cruelty now turned them into villains in front of dozens of witnesses. And for the first time it was Emily who walked through the room without lowering her head, leaving behind a silence that burned more than any laughter. When Emily walked out the cafe door with her daughter by the hand, she left behind a trail of uncomfortable silence. The millionaire didn't follow her immediately. He stood still, watching the reactions of the executives, the cell phone cameras, and the manager, who was now trembling at her own shadow. He knew the scene wouldn't end there. There was something about that woman, something beyond the obvious, as if her strength had deeper roots than anyone there imagined. As soon as he returned to the office, his mind couldn't turn off. During meetings, signings, and phone calls, her face kept appearing like a puzzle demanding to be deciphered. That night, alone in his penthouse, illuminated by the glass windows, he did what he always did when he needed to understand someone. He investigated, not out of suspicion, but out of an almost uncontrollable instinct. He typed the name Emily Carter into the private record system he had access to. Each line that appeared on the screen was like a silent punch. Files of unfinished adoptions, foster care records, social services reports, old photos of a serious-looking girl in clothes that always seemed a size too big appeared before him. It was the same woman who now walked the streets with fierce dignity, but what stopped him in his tracks was one specific detail. Among the reports was a document from a scholarship program his own foundation had created years ago. Her name was there, listed as one of the successful applicants, but with the note in red: "Did not attend, address not." Found. He read and reread the note until he understood what it meant. Emily could have had the chance to study with the support of her own company, but cruel fate, or perhaps someone's negligence, had robbed her of that opportunity. Her life could have taken a different path if only they had been able to deliver that letter. The millionaire put his laptop aside and stood motionless for a few minutes. He felt a mixture of guilt and fascination. Guilt for discovering that, indirectly, he had crossed her path in the past and failed. Fascination for realizing that, despite everything, she had built a strength that not even the absence of help could erase. It was as if the universe had conspired to bring them face to face again, but this time under circumstances that required not just observation, but action. In the following days, he began following her from afar, not with the weight of a stalker, but with the curiosity of someone who needs to understand. He saw her wake up early to take her daughter to public school, watched her go into community libraries to use old computers and research job openings, noticed the way she turned coins into small victories, a shared snack, a pair of thrift store shoes, a used storybook for her daughter. Every detail was a revelation, every gesture proof that she carried something no amount of money could buy: resilience. It was then that he realized the real secret. Emily wasn't just a woman trying to survive. She was, unknowingly, a reflection of the flaws in a system he himself helped sustain. The same system that rewarded arrogant executives' bets and overlooked faces like hers. The meeting at the cafe hadn't been a coincidence. It was a settling of scores, and for the first time in years, the millionaire felt that it wasn't he who held the power in this story. It was her. In the days that followed, Emily seemed to have vanished from the city, like dust blown away by the wind. The millionaire, accustomed to moving worlds, with a phone call, discovered there were limits to his power. He discreetly called contacts at employment agencies, searched databases, even requested internal reports from his own coffee chain, but nothing. Emily was nowhere to be seen. It was as if she had been swallowed by the same invisibility that had suffocated her for so long. At first he thought it was just curiosity, but as the days passed, her absence became an unbearable weight. In the boardroom, the executives' voices sounded hollow, like echoes in an empty hallway. At social events, the fake laughter of business associates irritated him more than ever. He found himself staring into space, remembering the way Emily had held her chin up in the face of humiliation, returning his sharp words with a courage he hadn't found in himself in years. One night he returned to the same cafe. The ambiance was identical: marble tables, practiced laughter, expensive perfumes in the air. But nothing seemed to shine. He sat in the same corner from where he'd first noticed her. He ordered a coffee but didn't drink it. He just stared at the door, as if she might walk in at any moment, her briefcase clutched to her chest, her daughter smiling outside. The emptiness of that wait was the exact image of something he'd never felt before: longing. The millionaire began to replay the scenes in his mind, searching for signs he might have missed. The way she held the documents, the words spoken so firmly, the revelation that she knew about the bet. She wasn't just a victim. He was someone who was always one step ahead, someone who knew more than he let on. And now, gone, she left behind questions that kept him awake. Where was she? Why had she disappeared? Was it out of fear of retaliation, or pride because she didn't want to owe anyone anything, not even him? The nights grew long, filled with the distant sound of the city that never stopped. He paced the rooftop, staring at his own reflection in the windows, wondering how a man surrounded by wealth, cars, properties, and influence could feel so poor. He realized that everything he had seemed to lose value in her absence. It wasn't just Emily as a person. It was what she represented, an uncomfortable mirror that forced him to look at himself, at his own vanity, at the dirty games he had allowed to flourish around him. When he finally tried to convince himself that perhaps it would be better to forget, reality hit him in a different way. News began circulating. On social media, the video of the humiliation in the cafe had spread. Thousands of people shared it, commenting not only on the executive's cruelty, but especially on Emily's determination. She had become a symbol. While he hid behind numbers and contracts, she, with nothing but words and courage, transformed the narrative of an entire city. And that's when the emptiness turned into need. He didn't just want to find her, he needed her to rediscover his own humanity. Emily had disappeared, but her absence was now so glaring that no silence could muffle it. The video of the humiliation spread like wildfire. In less than a week, it was no longer just a recording lost on curious cell phones. It was in local newspapers, on TV shows, and on international social media. Emily's face, uplifted amidst the scorn, became a symbol of silent resistance, while the executives, caught laughing and betting against her, became caricatures of cruelty. But there was a detail no one expected. The millionaire also appeared. In the images, he emerged as a mysterious figure, first silent, then as the one who intervened with a phrase that defied the logic of the place. "You're hired," his deep voice echoed in the shared videos, multiplying likes, debates, and hashtags. But instead of being seen as a hero, he became the target of a much harsher judgment. Headlines began to question, how could such a powerful man socialize with executives at that level? Why did he allow a culture of contempt within his own business network? The cameras that had previously followed him to showcase his glamour now surrounded him, demanding answers. At meetings, shareholders pressured him, demanding measures, resignations, public apologies. The silence that had always protected him now became a weapon against him. Every pause was interpreted as complicity, every gesture as cold calculation. At gala dinners, the whispers changed tone. If before they were reverence, now they were veiled accusations. He only spoke out because the scene was being filmed, some said. It's just another image stunt, others asserted. The confidence he'd always carried like armor began to crack. For the first time, he felt the weight of not controlling the narrative. The public no longer saw him as a distant tycoon, but as part of a rotten system that exposed a single mother to cruelty. The pressure reached a peak when protests began to form in front of the cafe's branches. People held up signs with Emily's face, and slogans like "We are not your bet." Organized groups called for boycotts, and even local artists declared their support for the unknown young woman who had suddenly become the voice of many. The millionaire watched it all from his penthouse, his screens tuned to different channels, but always showing the same scene, his empire faltering not because of a financial failure, but because of a moral truth. Something burned inside him. It wasn't just fear of losing prestige, contracts, or shares. It was the visceral discomfort of realizing that social judgment wasn't unfair. He had truly allowed this kind of cruelty to grow around him. He hadn't been directly complicit, but he had turned a blind eye too many times. And now, faced with her public downfall, there was no denying it. Emily wasn't just the victim of that morning. She was a reflection of everyone who had been ignored in the name of profit and vanity. The millionaire, who had always believed he could shield himself in silence, discovered that the entire city had become his court, and no lawyer, contract, or fortune could absolve him of the question that echoed from every screen, in every headline, on every poster. And now, what are you going to do? The pressure didn't just come from the streets, nor from the headlines, nor from shareholders. It came from the silence of the early morning hours, when the millionaire found himself alone before his own reflection in the high windows of his penthouse. For the first time. In years he didn't recognize the man he saw. His face was hardened, the subtle wrinkles formed by nights of calculation, the empty gaze of someone who had always confused respect with fear. Emily's image loomed like a constant shadow, invading his every thought. It wasn't just about her. It was about what she had revealed in him, the weakness of an empire built on arrogance and indifference. The meetings lost their meaning. The reports, which had once been almost music, now sounded like distant noises. Even the money itself seemed colorless. He watched the stocks plummet, the protests outside stores, but what bothered him most was the void left by Emily. Her quiet dignity, her courage to face humiliation, resonated louder than any number he had ever manipulated. For the first time, he wanted not only to repair his own image, but to become someone different. He began visiting places he'd never been before. He went to the outskirts of the city, where buildings were marked by abandonment, and the streets carried stories the newspapers ignored. He sat on park benches, listening to stories of single mothers, of invisible workers, of young people who, like Emily once, dreamed of studying but never received a response. The more he listened, the more he realized his power had always been wasted. He didn't need more contracts. He needed purpose. In that silent transformation, small gestures began to emerge. She cancelled frivolous dinners, sold one of her luxury cars, and donated the proceeds to scholarships. She visited orphanages without telling the press, without photographers, just to observe and understand. She spent hours watching children run, remembering how Emily had held her daughter so tightly as they left the cafe, as if that embrace were her only shield against the world. The nights were still long, but now there was a kind of flame in them. He read, studied, sought to understand stories he had previously ignored. He discovered that transformation would come not from official statements or press releases, but from within. And with each step, the image that haunted him became clearer. Emily was not just a woman who faced humiliation. She was living proof that it is possible to resist contempt and still maintain dignity. It was at this point that the millionaire realized something he had never admitted before. He needed her not as an employee, not as a symbol, but as a bridge. Emily was the link separating him from a humanity he had buried beneath figures and contracts. Transforming himself meant more than restoring his reputation. It meant looking at her and, in looking, finally recognizing himself. It was on an autumn afternoon that their reunion took place, not in a luxurious salon or at a scheduled meeting, but in the simplicity of a public library. The millionaire had spent weeks wandering the city searching for answers, and that day he entered the red brick building almost on impulse. The smell of old books, mixed with the low sound of pages, being turned, brought a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. True silence. He walked among the shelves, observing children doing homework, elderly people reading yellowed newspapers, young people researching on outdated computers. And then, in the corner lit by a window, he saw her. Emily was there, leaning over the table, helping her daughter with math homework. Her hair was simply tied back. Her worn coat was something he remembered from the cafe, but in her eyes was the same firmness that had haunted him since their first meeting. For a moment he hesitated. The man who ruled empires found himself unable to move. But Ava, his daughter, was the one who noticed it first. The girl looked up and stared at him with innocent curiosity, tugging discreetly on her mother's arm. Emily looked up and froze when she saw him standing there, motionless, as if the scene had been plucked from a dream or a distant memory. Time stood still. The words didn't come immediately. She simply closed. The notebook calmly settled her daughter beside her and waited. The millionaire took a deep breath, took 2 steps forward, and said in a low voice, almost a whisper, "I looked for you." There was no arrogance, no commanding tone. There was simply a raw confession exposing her vulnerability. Emily stared at him for a few seconds, her lips pressed together, before replying, "I'm not that hard to find. I just needed someone to really look at me." The daughter, not understanding the weight of His words smiled and excused herself to take another book from the shelf. They were alone face to face, surrounded by the complicit silence of the shelves that seemed to bear witness to something greater. He then took an envelope from his pocket. It was a copy of the old document, the scholarship that had never reached her. He placed it on the table, as if offering not a gift, but an apology. This was supposed to be yours, and I failed you before I even knew who you were. Emily looked at the paper, but didn't touch it. Her gaze remained fixed on it, assessing not the gesture itself, but the man making it. There was a mixture of hurt and understanding in her expression, as if she understood that this reunion wasn't about past or future, but about truth. He, accustomed to controlling narratives, now stripped himself of all armor. He didn't offer a job, he didn't offer money, he offered only a silent acknowledgement that she had been forgotten, and that this affected him more than his own. Public downfall. The moment stretched on. Outside, dry leaves fell from the trees, blown by the cold wind. Inside the library, the scene was almost sacred. Two worlds, once opposed, now face to face, without luxurious witnesses, without applause, only the raw reality of a story that united them without their having chosen it. Emily stood motionless before him, as if silence were a harsher judgment than any words. The envelope containing the scholarship lay on the table, but to her it was nothing, more than a reminder of everything she had lost. Her steady eyes roamed the millionaire's face, searching for signs of sincerity in every line, every wrinkle marked by years of cold decisions. He didn't look away. For the first time, he seemed willing to be seen without a mask. "I'm not here to offer charity," he said in a low, almost trembling voice. "I'm here because you showed me who I was, and I didn't like what I saw. I need to change, and I need to tell you that you taught me that." Emily took a deep breath. Her hands clutched her coat as if to protect her heart from the avalanche of emotions. Her daughter was still distracted by books, and that moment seemed suspended in another reality. She finally answered calmly but sharply. "Do you think an apology changes years of silence? Do you think meeting me now erases the doors that were closed, the sleepless nights, the jobs denied, the humiliation of having to beg in front of those who laughed at me?" He lowered his head, unable to deny it. The weight of her words pierced the air like broken glass, but then Emily leaned forward slightly, and her voice softened, bringing an almost painful clarity. "I don't hate you, but I also don't feel obligated to save you." She paused for a long moment, letting the sentence sink in. "Forgiveness isn't something you receive by asking for it. It's something you build, and I haven't seen you build anything yet that proves to me you deserve it." The millionaire felt the impact, like a punch to the gut. He expected rejection, perhaps, but not that sharp lucidity that would further undress him. He tried to insist, but Emily raised her hand, asking for silence. "I choose to move on, not for you, but for myself and my daughter. You had everything, but you never knew what it was to lose. I lost so much that I learned to transform loss into strength, and that strength is mine alone." There was a moment when her eyes welled up, but not with pain, with release. It was as if, in that moment, Emily offered not an explicit forgiveness, but something even deeper, a decision not to be a prisoner of the past, not his, not anyone's. She stood, called Ava over with a smile, took her daughter's hand, and prepared to leave. Before walking through the library door, she turned one last time. Her eyes met his, and in a firm voice she said, "I don't need you to hire me. I don't need you to save me. I just need you to never again pretend not to see people like me." He stood there, unable to move a muscle. Her decision had been clear. There was no easy reconciliation, no instant redemption. Only the opportunity for him to choose from that moment whether he would truly change or continue to live as the ghost of his fortune. Emily left, and the space she left behind wasn't empty. It was a mirror. Dusk was falling when he left the library. The autumn wind lifted dry leaves that swirled in the air before scattering across the damp asphalt. Emily and her daughter walked ahead, hand in hand, like two anonymous figures among many others. The millionaire remained standing on the steps, silently observing the scene until they disappeared among the trees in the neighboring square. He didn't attempt to follow them. He simply stood there, motionless, the envelope still in his hand, feeling the weight of a past that could not be changed and a future that would only make sense if it were different. A group of protesters passed by, holding signs bearing her face, unaware that she herself was so close, mingling with the common crowd. Their voices screamed for justice, each syllable echoing like a call. Instinctively, he looked up at the grey sky, where heavy clouds were slowly parting, letting out a beam of golden light that illuminated the library's facade. The contrast was so stark it seemed like a scene concocted by fate itself. Without saying a word, the millionaire opened the envelope, carefully tore the document apart, and let the pieces fly with the wind. There was no anger in the gesture, only detachment. He walked to the edge of the square, passing through the crowds, inconspicuously, as if he had finally understood the value of being invisible for a moment. In the distance, Emily's daughter let out an innocent laugh as she chased a dove that took flight. Emily followed her with her eyes, a brief smile on her lips. He didn't approach. He simply stood before the scene, observed it as if contemplating a painting, and then turned, walking alone down the street that disappeared into the horizon. Each footstep echoed not like the sound of a powerful man, but of someone walking lightly for the first time. The leaves continued to fall, and the wind scattered them in opposite directions, as if the world insisted on reminding us that some stories don't need endings spoken aloud. Only silence. If you've made it this far, I want to hear your opinion. What would you have done in her place? Write in the comments. I'll read them all. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see more stories like this, and click on the video that's currently playing, because I'm sure you won't want to miss the rest of this journey.